Yes, blow it up! Blow it back to God. All your life has been spent in pursuit of archaeological relics. Inside the ark are treasures beyond your wildest aspirations. You want to see it open as well as I. Indiana, we are simply passing through history. This is history.
Hello and welcome to the History Through Film podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Allen, and on today's episode, I got a couple of special guests, ones that I mentioned before that would be joining me from time to time. I've got Nick Madeline and Alex Winkler. Nick, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nick Madeline. I've been a teacher for around 11 years. I teach American history and sociology, and really just excited to kind of get in on this with you.
Great. And Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex Winkler. I've been teaching for the past couple years now. Very excited to just join you guys and talk about two things that we love, movies and history.
Awesome. Yeah, I on my last episode, I kind of explained the layout of this podcast and what the point of it is. And we're excited to talk today about Raiders of the Lost Ark. This may be our first official podcast. We'll see what order these go in. But if you're listening to it now, I hope that you're a Raiders fan. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the film, the movie itself, and why we're big fans. A little bit about how we all came to this film. For my own personal story, I think I was about 10 or 11 years old. It came out in 81, and I distinctly remember seeing the trailer for this movie when I went to go see a horrible film called The Legend of the Lone Ranger. And I remember sitting in the theater at Oak Park Mall, and the Raiders trailer came on, and my first instinct was, why is Han Solo dressed like that? And I honestly got excited thinking that it was another Han Solo film, but of course, then we find out that this new character is Indiana Jones. And since then, obviously, after that film came out, I became a fan of all the other ones. And I kind of split my time either being Han Solo or Indiana Jones as a kid. And so I was lucky enough to actually see it when it came out in the theater. That's how old I am, I guess. Nick, what about you?
For me, I was a little too young. I wasn't an active movie watcher in 1981. But I actually saw Temple of Doom before I saw this one. My dad was a huge Indiana Jones fan, and I watched that with him and ended up backtracking and watching this one, and then Last Crusade, and then whatever that was that they called Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
So you actually watched them in order then?
I did. From a technical order, I did watch them all in order, and it's, it brings out so many childhood memories. I mean, who didn't want to be an archaeologist after watching Indiana Jones?
This guy did, that's for sure.
Best profession ever. So that's kind of where I went with it. Alex?
It's funny. You guys say I was not even thought of in 1981. So
Alex is our youngest contributor.
He turned 12 last week.
So I'm younger. I'm younger than both of you. But Curtis, you and I share a very similar thing. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I was watching the Star Wars, the original trilogy, and
One with Jar Jar Binks?
No Jar Jar
okay.
Binks, no sand that gets everywhere. It was just the original trilogy. And, I got this box set from my grandparents, and then they also gave me the box set of Indiana Jones. And I watched it, or I wanted to watch Indiana Jones because I saw the original Star Wars and saw Han Solo and saw Harrison Ford. And I figured, well, if he's Han Solo and he's in this movie too, it has to be good. So you and I are from completely different generations, but our intrigue is kind of the same, and what led us to Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember as a little kid wanting to be Indiana Jones. I actually picked up a jump rope in my house and pretended it was a whip, walking around my house thinking I was Indiana Jones.
I'm sure the dogs love that.
Dog leashes were also good whips too. Just about anything you can get your hands on. I don't know what kid didn't actually pick up a piece of string or something.
Extension
A belt was
cords,
good too.
Belts, yep.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I split my time between wanting to be Han Solo and Indiana Jones, like I said. But when it got to a point to where I wanted to figure out what I was going to possibly do with my life, I obviously couldn't become a smuggler. So I literally
That's
looked.
illegal.
illegal.
Yeah, I literally looked into becoming an archaeologist. I remember probably a freshman or sophomore when we went to Washington, D.C., visited George Washington University. I got information on their archaeology school. And then you realize that it's just not as exciting as it
A lot of
is
digging,
on-
a lot
yeah.
of sanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it certainly wasn't the Indiana Jones that we remember. But let's get kind of into the movie. A little bit of the background, and you guys probably know this, and those of you listening, obviously you may have heard some of these stories as it comes to Raiders of the Lost Ark. But the story idea started in Hawaii in 1977. Spielberg is on vacation, relaxing from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and a small space film called Star Wars had just opened, and Lucas was a little worried about it, but as word of mouth was spreading and popularity picked up, he just wanted to take a break. And I remember the two of them, I remember reading about the two of them meeting on the beach, and Spielberg had said that his next film, he wanted to direct a Bond movie. And
Wow, I didn't know that.
and believe it or not, Lucas basically said, "I've got something better than Bond." And Lucas had a treatment for Raiders of the Lost Ark, but at that point, I think it was The Adventures of Indiana Smith. And yeah, so he had basically a treatment of somebody that was a little bit like James Bond, but more of a scholarly archaeologist type that would go around and collect artifacts and relics. And of course, as the story goes, he got the name Indiana from Lucas's own dog, which of course was the inspiration for Chewbacca. That most people realize that too. They've heard that story. So what's kind of interesting about this story as it grows is Lucas had talked Spielberg into doing the first one. He actually convinced him that he had 3 other films already written, or for a total of a trilogy. And Spielberg decided that he would direct the films as long as he didn't have to write them. The truth of it is, Lucas had nothing prepared.
Little white lie.
Yeah, he
Never-
just wanted
never
to-
hurts anybody.
Yeah, I mean, he basically just wanted to get through this whole process of getting
Right.
the what was started.
Kind of like how you got us to come on and do this with you.
Yeah,
No real idea.
No
Just
real
come
idea.
on,
Just
we'll
come
see where
on
it
and we'll
goes.
see where this goes.
Those of you who don't know, it took me about 20 minutes to set up my operation here because I thought we were, it was spot on, but that's technical difficulties.
Right.
Things will get ironed out as this podcast grows and grows, hopefully. Well, obviously they changed the name to Jones because Spielberg didn't really like the name Indiana Smith, and it certainly doesn't really fit. I mean, not that Jones is, it's probably the most common name there is,
Well,
but
minus Smith.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, Lucas, if you know anything about George Lucas, which we'll talk about him later when we get to Star Wars eventually, but the idea is he is just a fan of serials from the 30s to the 40s, the adventure serials, Flash Gordon's, Buck Rogers, and all that. So he designed Indiana Jones off of the 1930s serials, the films that you would go in, those little short ones. And what's interesting is Spielberg saw Indiana Jones as more of a darker character, kind of like a Bogart from like Treasure of the Sierra Madre, kind of an alcoholic. And we didn't really get that Indiana Jones. We get a womanizing type of Indiana Jones.
Kind of a James Bond Indiana
Yeah,
Jones.
I mean,
It really is an American James Bond film.
Yeah,
Right.
it really is. Minus the gadgets, I guess, because that's one thing that Lucas did point out. He said it's going to be James Bond, but minus the gadgets, and that's because it was set back in like the 30s. I guess you could have made it a little bit more science fiction with some gadgets that were out of place, but they kind of stuck with the whip, the revolver, and they went with that.
But those are rugged American
Yeah, I
gadgets.
agree with you.
That's,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
It's rugged American
There you go.
gadgets. The American side of Bond. He still gets
Unshaven, gets the girls. He kind of goes about it with an arrogance about him. I mean, very American.
Yeah.
the
I
girl. And not
agree
to
with
look
you.
back at a different film, but you saw him in Temple of Doom. He's suave.
Very
He's
suave.
dressed up, and he's a college professor, so he has that classy element of
Yes.
Bond, but yet has the adventurous, gets himself out of trouble whenever he finds himself in impossible situations. I mean, it's America and Bond to a sense.
Yeah, and that's more of Spielberg's molding of the character, because Spielberg did want to stick, or excuse me, Lucas. I say Spielberg. Lucas wanted to stick with the scholarly adventure teacher, and that's what they got a little bit, later in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
You do get a kind of a superhero type of feel. Like
yeah.
he's this, this suave teacher by day, and when he puts on his costume, he turns into this guy who can rip people out of a truck going 50 miles an hour. I mean, you do get it.
Definitely. And that's what's great about, and we'll talk about this, but that's what's great about Indiana Jones. He's not Superman. He's not even Batman for that matter. He's just kind of an average guy that gets himself in predicaments that he usually doesn't win the fight, but he gets away. So Lucas and Spielberg are ready to write a script. They hire Lawrence Kasdan, and you guys know him from The Big Chill, Silverado, and of course the guy that wrote The Empire Strikes Back, or at least the script for that. And he also came back to write The Force Awakens with J.J. Abrams. So Lawrence Kasdan has had a lot of experience with writing, and so he's one of the guys that is credited for, fleshing out that story. And this is interesting too. When they got the story done, they had a lot of elements that they had to cut out of Raiders and put into Temple of Doom, like the mine chase. They had a scene with Indiana Jones escaping a nightclub behind a gong, a large rolling gong, and of course those things were cut out of there. But anyways, we'll talk about those if we ever get to Temple of Doom as well. But here's the funny thing. They shop around the script. You have Lucas, you have Spielberg, you have Lawrence Kasdan, who are shopping around this script with like a $20 million budget. No studio wants it. Nobody wants this film.
Who missed it.
And, the funny thing is, are you kidding me? We just had The Empire Strikes Back. You've had Star Wars. You've had Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Of course, you've had 1941, which wasn't really a success for Spielberg. But, it's funny. But Paramount finally agrees to get the film going. And then they start casting. And you guys have probably heard this story. They've tried out numerous actors. Lucas did not want somebody that was known. He didn't want to pull actors from other films because he didn't want, like, for instance, Harrison Ford to be his Robert De Niro.
Right.
And that was kind of like a reference to Robert De Niro being in a lot of Scorsese films. And they cast Tom Selleck. Most people have heard this story before. 3 weeks before filming, Tom cannot get out of his contract with CBS and Magnum PI, so he has to leave the film. And literally, Lucas gets a phone call from Spielberg, who had just seen The Empire Strikes Back, and he's like, George, we've got our Indiana Jones right under our nose. And as the story goes, Lucas says to him, I know exactly who you're talking about, Harrison Ford. So they cast him. About 2 weeks before the film is going to start production, Harrison Ford shows up.
What a different Indiana Jones we would have had with Tom Selleck, though. I can't even imagine.
I wonder if he would have shaved the mustache.
Oh, there's no way. Men with mustaches like that don't shave them.
There's a million stories about what if this character actually got cast or this guy actually got cast, to play this character. It'd be a fun guessing game, but
right.
Yeah. So obviously, Karen Allen was cast, even though Sean Young actually, tried out for the role, and then the rest is history. The film gets made, and so why don't we dive into the movie? So our story opens up in 1936, as most of you know if you've seen the film. By the way, this is probably going to be what's considered a spoiler podcast. If you haven't seen Indiana Jones,
probably don't want to listen to
Raiders
this.
of the Lost Ark, you shouldn't even be listening to this.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. So
you need to get on your Amazon Prime account.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I like to do in this podcast when we discuss movies is talk a little bit about, when the movies are made, but not only that, but when they're set. Obviously, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a fictional film, a fictional story, but there's a lot of history that you can find in the film. The fact that it opens in 1936, as a viewer, you're kind of wondering what happened in 1936. Some of the things that I had noted, maybe you guys can chime in if you'd like, but the 1936 Olympics in Berlin with Jesse Owens.
Right.
FDR is elected to a second term. We've got the Hindenburg taking its maiden flight in Germany. It hasn't come across siege quite yet, and that tragic blowing up. Gone with the Wind is published as a book, and later will obviously be made into a film, one of the greatest, most people argue. Some famous birthdays. These are kind of fun. Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, John McCain,
Wow.
Jim Henson, and of course others. But those are the four main
Masculine
guys.
men right there.
I think you mean Turd Ferguson for Burt Reynolds. That's how I
Yes, turd for. There we go. An SNL joke there. What were the one thing that is kind of interesting to me is the relationship between the U.S. and Germany at the time in 1936. Were we quite there yet as far as war is concerned? Obviously, the United States not in the war, but what I mean is we see the Nazis as these evil people in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course they are. But as far as the world outlook on them, have we gotten there yet? Or
the United States was still in the Depression. It's 1936, and the focus in the United States at this time was rebuilding at home. We're in several New Deal programs are happening. America isn't necessarily focused on Europe. We're in a period of isolationism in a sense because we're trying to repair what's going on at home. FDR probably had knowledge of some things happening. He obviously had knowledge of things happening in Europe, but the primary concern was the home front in terms of America. Now, the rest of the world, I'm sure was catching wind of Hitler. And Nick, I think you mentioned something earlier.
No, I mean, it's, they don't really dive into that in the movie a whole lot. It's, him in college. It's a lot of women in college. That would have definitely been the more affluent of the people there. You look at his classes, there's that famous scene where she has "I love you" written on her eyelids. There women in college was still rare. So to see a class full of women with one guy and an apple, probably they may have taken a little bit of writers. What's the word I'm looking for here?
creative
liberties within that.
Yes.
But you're exactly right. I mean, Europe's in tatters. When the United States stock market crashes, so does the European market. So all the way around the world, there wasn't a whole lot going on. Obviously, leading to Hitler's rise. 32 is when he starts to kind of make his jump. But Germany is coming out quicker than the other two countries are. And when they refuse to stand up to him on many, many occasions, the appeasement will later lead to what we know as World War II. But there's the movie's obviously very much built around the theme of Nazis. But America and Germany were not necessarily the best of friends, but we're kind of avoiding each other at all costs.
Well, and the rest of the world wasn't completely aware of the evil that Hitler would become in 1936. It's really before we see Hitler start enacting all of the evil programs and plots.
Unless your name was Winston Churchill, right? He picked it up really early. But other than him, everyone either didn't see him for what he was or didn't care enough.
And some of the world is a little bit in awe in how he's building Germany back up too. So people are people were looking from the outside going, what's this guy doing that we need to maybe start doing?
Right.
And then before.
No genocide at that point.
Yes.
No knowledge of anything. I mean, obviously the programs had begun to kind of separate and isolate Jewish members of German society, but none of the evils that we know of today.
Yeah. So the film obviously opens in what's called South America. It's really Kauai, beautiful Kauai, and we've got Indiana Jones and his group of kind of packmen or his group looking for some kind of treasure. They're going into this cave where he last heard of another competitor that was looking for this idol.
This is it. This is where Forrestal cashed in.
A friend of yours?
A competitor. He was good. He was very, very good.
Senor, nobody's come out of there alive. Please.
We all know when they get in the cave, they go through some booby traps, things like that. Did you guys know that Lucas got the idea from these booby traps from an Uncle Scrooge comic book?
Really?
It's
not know
that.
the seven cities of gold, which I guess is some ancient tale about, cities of gold. And they literally got some of the ideas of like the boulder that rolls down, and of course the booby traps and things shooting from an Uncle Scrooge comic. I thought that was pretty interesting.
It's better than a well executed Wile E. Coyote scheme.
Yes.
Although there are parts that they may be Wile E. Coyote-esque.
Yeah, nothing from Acme yet, right?
Right.
So obviously the opening scene with Alfred Molina, by the way, Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2. This is his first film.
Let us hurry. There is nothing to fear here. That's what scares me.
So he looks a lot younger, a lot thinner, and we all
Less tentacles.
Yes, less tentacles.
And kind of an interesting accent, if you will.
Yes,
Yes.
the Helvitos.
Yes.
So obviously, you've got that great opening scene where Indiana Jones steals the fertility idol. This is, by the way, this is from the Chachapoyan people, is who these are supposed to be, kind of based off of the Warriors of the Clouds. So these are real indigenous people from South America that apparently existed before the Mayans, is what my understanding is. And after Indiana Jones escapes that situation, we meet his nemesis, René Belloc. Belloc, right?
How unmasculine can you sound?
René Belloc. Yeah, our French archaeologist.
Of course, it's the French.
Yeah, played by Paul Freeman.
Dr. Jones, again we see there is nothing you can possess which I cannot take away. And you thought I'd given up.
And of course, he is surrounded by the Jovito, which are real indigenous people of Peru. And of course, this is the famous chase from, Belloc takes the idol from Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones flees. And this is where we find a little bit out about Indiana Jones. He's afraid of snakes. And of course, that's the plant that's going to pay off later on when they get into the Well of the Souls.
Did you ever notice in that scene, Alex being our gun aficionado here, the tight pattern of the blow darts on the guide's back from the indigenous people, but then they turn around and cannot hit him with a spear at around 5 feet.
Yeah, again, that's the marksmanship when it doesn't matter.
That you gotta love it. You see this nice tight pattern, and then he's running away, and they cannot touch him with the spears at 5 feet. So
is that the Stormtrooper Academy of shooting? It might be. But we escape. So we escape. Jacques, start the engine. Jacques, Indiana Jones is yelling at him, and we obviously Indiana Jones does one of the most awkward dives from a vine into the river. I guess he's not that graceful, but he eventually makes it. And again, going back to your shooting and throwing spears and blow darts and things like that, they can't hit him at all. But doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Movie
we've
be
already
over.
bought into the movie.
We love the movie.
Yes, we're already there.
We're there.
It could
It's
have
in.
credits could have ended, and I would have walked out like, okay,
Man,
sign
all right,
me up.
Exciting.
So we meet Jacques. Of course, we fly off, and again, going back to the snake, that's kind of a plant of we know that Indiana Jones doesn't like snakes.
There's a big snake in the plane, Jacques! Oh, that's just my pet snake, Reggie! I hate snakes, Jacques! I hate them! Come on, show a little backbone, will ya?
Marshall College, a fictional college named after Frank Marshall. And we meet Marcus Brody, of course, his boss, Denholm Elliott, is the actor, the great Denholm Elliott. And this is where we really get into the story. And I'll let you guys talk a little bit about this. This is where the MacGuffin, what they call the MacGuffin in films, is planted. Of course, the MacGuffin that's going to drive Indiana Jones is the Lost Ark. It's going to drive the whole story, in fact. But there are several things that are mentioned in this little scenario or this scene that I think are pretty interesting. They talk a little bit about Hitler and the occult. They talk a little bit about the city of Tanis, the Well of the Souls, and of course, the Ark of the Covenant.
The Lost Ark.
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant, the chest the Hebrews used to carry around the Ten Commandments.
What do you mean, Commandments? You're talking about the Ten Commandments?
Yes, the actual Ten Commandments, the original stone tablets that Moses brought down out of Mount Horeb and smashed, if you believe in that sort of thing. You guys ever go to Sunday school?
And what's interesting is the story that the government officials tell and the conversation they have with Marcus Brody and Indiana Jones seems to fit kind of real history when it comes to those artifacts. What do you guys think about that? Especially the Hitler and the occult? There's always been rumors of him trying to collect these artifacts to get any kind of advantage for world domination.
Yeah, and it's unclear exactly what Hitler's intent was with them. Historians will argue that yes, he saw himself kind of as a god, and that this was a way for him to more or less put him up there in the same light as the Christian God. Or some people just argued that he was after wealth, looking at ways to fund his big, war machine, and that's obvious with the amount of art and artifacts and money and gold and things that he stole from the areas in which he conquered, and that's well documented. So, what his true intent was with searching for lost antiquities is probably unknown. We'll never know. But he didn't discriminate, and he definitely did put a lot of resources into looking for objects that we would be considered of the occult. So,
yeah, I think one thing you could potentially consider from that is the fact that when we look at groups that are bent on domination throughout the history of mankind, one thing that they do is take the relics, the art, really the culture and religion of an area per se that they want to take over. Because if they hold those things, they take them away from the people, and it almost strips an identity away from a group of people. And by Hitler doing that or wanting to do that, it sets up his version of a perfect society, the Reich that he wanted to set up. And now he's taken away any element of culture or art, or you saw it in France.
Individuality.
He takes. There's so many stories of French resistance fighters hiding art to preserve that culture.
They're still finding lost troves of art, places that the cities that have been around for this long. They're still finding art hidden in places and walls and
which was
treasures.
Part of the inspiration for the film that was released a few years ago called Monuments Men,
right?
Which focused on recovering that lost art and saving that lost art. So Hitler may have been concerned with taking the identity away from groups of people, and by using relics and art to do that.
Absolutely, I agree.
And Alex, you were saying something interesting about the power of the Ark, or what's conceived to be the power of the Ark, like in the Testaments, and what were you kind of saying about that earlier?
Well, yeah, if you go back to the Old Testament in the Bible, obviously you get the description and the picture of the Ark, and how it kind of came to be, and for the Israelites in the Old Testament, the Ark represented the presence of God. So to them, having the Ark with them represented the presence of God with them. So it was an extremely important piece for them to have around. There were strict rules regarding the Ark. It had to be kept in a separate place when it traveled. It had to have a covering on it. You couldn't really go in and look at the Ark. There's actually King David in the Bible was wanting the Ark to be transported to Jerusalem. And it was as it was being transported, there was someone by the name of Uzzah who was helping transport the Ark, and it was wobbling as it was being carried. And Uzzah puts his hand up on the Ark, and as the Bible says that God struck him dead for touching the Ark because it violated the rule that was set forth that it was supposed to be the presence of God, the representation of God amongst the Israelite peoples.
Wow, interesting.
Absolutely, and I mean, obviously, the traveling Ark, bringing it with you, it was probably the motivation behind finding this in Tanis, or using Tanis as the dig site. Yeah. For the most part, there's no record of the Ark ever being in Tanis, or it being its last resting place.
Many believe it was destroyed by the Babylonians.
You've also seen reports that maybe the last place it was in northern Africa. But it would make sense that it would travel around, obviously, with the Israelites and moving down with wars and kind of just the mass migration of people from that area down amongst the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, Holy cow. The Mediterranean. Sorry.
Both start with an M.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all right.
This is live, guys. So,
Well,
sorry.
Seems we've come to the right place, just like in the movie. Okay, so obviously Indy takes the job. He's got nothing else going on, and you get that scene where he's packing, and Brody's a little concerned. Indy, this is the Ark of the Covenant. You've never gone after anything like this before. And then we get a mention of, do you think she'll be there? And of course, that's Marion. The first place that Indy has to head off to is Nepal to find a headpiece, a medallion to the staff of Ra that he believes Abner Ravenwood, an old acquaintance of his, has, that perhaps this mysterious Marion may be involved also, or she may have some whereabouts of Abner Ravenwood, who we never meet in any of the Indiana Jones movies. He's always talked about, but that's something I wish would have shown up in one of the films, but he never did. So,
Or the early adventures.
yeah,
Indiana,
exactly.
right?
So here we are. We get on our plane, we fly across the map, and we end up in Nepal.
Nepal. Why Nepal?
What's going on in Nepal, Nick?
It's cold and snowy, and you end up at a bar, right? And just in the middle there, you don't even see a village that's connected to the bar. It's just the bar in the middle of Nepal with a large snowstorm moving about.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. I don't know why Nepal, but it made for an interesting change of scenery.
No, but it does fit Marion's character though, because Karen Allen, the actress that plays her, she's like the perfect Marion. Especially if some lady's going to own a bar like that, run a bar like that in the middle of nowhere. So we meet Marion in the middle of some type of drinking competition where they're doing shots. What I like to call this is the plant for the payoff later on, and we'll get to that. But she's out drinking these guys.
And Anglo-Saxon guys, right? They're in the middle of Nepal, and she's having a drinking conversation with a very large Anglo-Saxon man that I'm guessing they're trying to play off with a bad tan or some sort of face coloring. He doesn't fit, I believe.
Well, not to mention too, she becomes extremely coherent after the drinking game, to enough to where she can run around the bar during the bar fight.
She's about to pass out,
yeah,
right
yeah,
before
right
that.
before.
It makes for a great scene. I love it, but it's just one of those things you're like, why? Why are there so many white folk in a bar in the middle of Nepal?
Haven't we all been in that situation though, where we think we drunk a little too much until something happens, and all of a sudden you need all your wits about you, and then guys break in. You've got a Gestapo interrogator in your face.
Right.
Happens to me every weekend.
I can count on no hands how many times it actually happened to me. But I have not been to Nepal. So
I wonder if
maybe
this
that's
is
the magic of Nepal.
When in Nepal.
When in Nepal.
When in Nepal.
Nepal.
I wonder if this is Spielberg's cantina scene, because it almost seems like that.
Kind of does, yeah.
It could be.
Is kind of a playback to that.
Yeah, so of course, Marion outdrinks the other guy, and the bar closes down. Indiana Jones shows up, and I'm looking for the piece, the headpiece. Basically, this is where we get some kind of inclination that something had happened between the two of them. She's happy to see him, but not happy to see him. And basically, it's left off of, hey, I need the headpiece. You know what I'm talking about? She says, come back tomorrow. And that's when Indiana Jones leaves. And this is where the bar's closed, but Tote, we're going to meet Arnold Tote, who's played by the great Ronald Lacey. And this is our Gestapo interrogator that comes in with his goon squad.
Good evening, Fräulein.
The bar is closed.
We are not thirsty.
And he's going to want the medallion, the same one that your friend Dr. Jones is looking for. He's an interesting actor. He fits the part perfectly. Probably better than the other two choices. One was Roman Polanski, the director, who was not available, and a German actor named Klaus Kinski, who thought that the script was rubbish. What does he know? Rubbish. But so we've got Ronald Lacey, and of course this is one of the best action scenes because he gets that hot poker, almost get a hot poker in the face to Marion. Yeah.
Wait. I'll tell you everything.
Yes, I know you will.
And then
turns around on him.
Yes, and then of course Indiana Jones is there to save the day. And that was a very complex scene to shoot just because of the fire and everything else that was involved. Interesting note, too, this is Spielberg's first gunfight. He'd never, outside of 1941, which didn't really have gunfights, it had guns in it, but it was more in a comical way. This is really his first film with a gunfight in it.
Maybe that's why Indiana Jones took 15 shots out of a 6-shot revolver
well, yeah.
without reloading.
Again, who's checking? Who's right?
Well,
who's
Alex
checking?
obviously is.
All right, so moving on, we Indiana Jones is there to save the day. We've got the medallion, but not before Tote, who tries to pick it up in the middle of the fight, picks up that hot medallion that's been sitting right next to the fire, and of course, that's going to be another plant that pays off later on. You know, the plants and the payoffs happen in all kinds of movies where something happens and then you're like, that's interesting. And then later on you say, oh my gosh, I can, you know, that makes sense because earlier on in the film, something was happening. Speaking of Marion, she's out drinking these guys in the Nepal bar. And we know that later on in the scene when she's with Belloc in the tent, that
she's gonna use the same.
They're gonna get into a drinking match, and of course, we know as the audience that she's gonna outdrink him because we've seen her do this before earlier.
She
in the
totally
film.
baits him in that scene as well. She plays into his manhood. You watch when he pours the glass and he sips very French-like, and she slams it. You know, he's gotta if he's gonna keep any manhood at all, he's got to keep up. She baits him into that.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Definitely. Okay, so we're off to Cairo, which is really Tunisia. That's where they filmed it. 120, degree days that they're fighting in the sun. And there's all kinds of stories about people trying not to get sick, trying not to get dysentery and other things like that. And we meet Saleh, Indy's sidekick or, good friend. John Rhys Davies is the actor. Again, good casting because they wanted Danny DeVito.
Oh, wow.
Are you kidding me?
How do you turn him into a native?
He would have been really easy to fit in one of those baskets that Marion
exactly
was
right.
in. Would have a very big one.
That'd be very creative on how to turn him into a native or someone that would fit within that.
Yeah. Well, you get Danny DeVito, and all of a sudden you're in Romancing the Stone,
right?
Or which that's kind of the offshoot of an Indiana Jones film in a sense. But so we meet Saleh and his family, of course, and then one of the next scenes, and this is probably arguably one of the best scenes in the film, is where we go shopping.
He said you were a bum.
Always being generous.
The most gifted bum he ever trained. You know, he loved you like a son. Took a hell of a lot for you to alienate him.
Not much, just you.
Of course, Indiana Jones and Marion are attacked, and she gets, kidnapped, or they get split up somehow.
She ends up in a basket,
That's right.
and he's chasing down, turning over baskets.
Total basket case.
Total basket case, exactly. Yeah, we had to go there, didn't we?
Yep.
And then one of the most famous scenes is, of course, the swordsman. Alex, what happened during that scene?
Well, you've got the famous scene where you have the swordsman comes up and, he does all these fancy moves, and Indiana Jones is he's fed up with the fight itself. It's taking too long. He can't find Marion. So rather than engage the swordsman, he just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Yeah.
The story behind it's fantastic.
Yeah, well, what is it?
So as Curtis said earlier, it's 120-degree days. Everyone's trying not to get sick, and Harrison Ford actually does get sick. He comes down with dysentery, and so he's just trying to survive the scene. And the scene that they had anticipated right there was going to involve an elaborate fight. He was going to have to fight the guy with the sword, and Harrison Ford talks to Spielberg, and they reach an agreement of sorts to just let Indiana Jones pull out his gun and shoot him. So the scene didn't have to take 3 days to film. They could get it over with in one, and Harrison Ford could go back to his tent and not have to deal with dysentery in public.
Well, and he did, Harrison Ford obviously went through extensive training for how to use a bullwhip, which can be deadly. You can mess yourself up pretty bad with a bullwhip. You'll shoot you. Yeah, you can whip your eye out, kid. And and there really was this behind the scenes. They had come up with this whole choreographed idea where he's fighting off the swordsman with a bullwhip. The swordsman's chasing him around, And yeah, you're right. That was going to take too long. And really, Harrison Ford was, what if I just shoot him? And of course, it's one of like greatest scenes.
But it's so indie. You know what I'm saying?
Perfect.
Well, does that scene create what we think of indie, or is that just indie being indie? You can argue it both ways.
Yeah,
but
I
that
think it's
scene,
both.
that scene is just the sarcasm, the eye roll almost at the end of it. Like, okay, great, and I'll shoot you anyway.
And it's the biggest laugh in the film.
Absolutely.
Too. It's great. And so then obviously he continues to search for Marion, and we see the basket being placed on the back of the truck. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the monkey, how they got the monkey. They actually trained the monkey to do the little Heil Hitler, and they finally got the monkey to do that a couple of times. And the monkey gives her away. They get the basket. You see it loaded on the back of the truck. Another great stunt with the truck taking off. Indiana Jones, shooting the driver. The truck flips over, blows up, and of course he thinks Marion's dead.
By his own hand.
By his own hand.
And just for the record, all vehicles, when they turn over on their side, blow up.
Oh, they do. Yeah, that's absolutely
a requirement.
Yeah, it is. And still a great. Yeah. What were those? Yeah. Okay. And then this is kind of an interesting scene coming up because we do see a little bit of the hard-driven kind of alcoholic Indiana Jones. He's sitting there with a bottle and the monkey, and he's drinking, and
bourbon, mind you.
Yeah,
he's drinking bourbon. Very American of him.
That's
right?
kind of like what. That's kind of like what Spielberg kind of saw the character. But this is a great scene where he runs into Belloc.
Belloc.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jones.
I ought to kill you right now.
Not a very private place for a murder?
And of course, they're in the bar, and they're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, and it's a calling card to God. And Indiana Jones says, "You want to see God? We can go right now." It's something interesting. When I was a kid, when Indiana Jones asks Belloc, he says, "What about the Fuhrer? What does he want with the Ark?" Or I never knew who the Fuhrer was because I was 10 or 11 years old.
Right.
I didn't.
Right.
Yeah, it took me till like 3 weeks ago to realize who De Fuhrer is. So
must be Hitler.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Well, that Hitler guy.
Something else interesting with that is how he's saved. Is they just send in a big group of kids to surround him and pull him out of that scene, right?
Yeah.
Which, I guess that's Egypt back then, but nowadays,
Well, and in the background before that happens, you see guys handing pistols and guns to each other. Like something's going down here, and of course. Sala sends in the better than the U.S. cavalry, huh?
Right.
And
they're so short compared to him. He stands, a good 2 feet over him,
yes. Right? So Indy's saved. That night, he and Sala realize that, of course, their headpiece, is the right one, and the Nazis are digging in the wrong place. And so, of course, our monkey eats a bad date.
Saves Indy's life.
Another bad date gone wrong.
Bad date. You're going to do this the whole time.
Another bad date.
That's what you guys pay me for.
And, of course, they were trying to poison the two guys. But the next day is where we get into our dig. And they're trying to make their way into the map room. And this is one of the famous scenes where, of course, Indy gets down into the map room. He's got the medallion on the staff. And he is sticking it in the right place to get that sun to shine right on the location of the Ark of the Covenant. It's a great scene. It's a great musical piece. By the way, we haven't even mentioned the score by John Williams.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah,
you hear the music and you can feel
by
it.
John Williams.
Right.
Musical score by John Williams.
Oh, it must
Moving
be great.
on.
Yeah,
exactly. One of how many? But anyways.
You did skip over him finding, Marion once again, right before that scene, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's coming up.
Oh, is that after that?
Yeah,
part?
that's
okay.
coming up because, remember that
right
he gets the information. He snaps the staff in half. He says, Sala, This is the part that bothered me for the longest time, and I guess it still does. All of a sudden, Sala throws down what looks like to be like bed sheets tied together. And at the very end of the bed sheets, if you want to call it that, is a Nazi flag. Indiana Jones unfurls the flag and he looks at it. And then the cut to Indiana Jones and Sala walking away as if nothing happened. And in my mind, as an audience member, I'm thinking, who's throwing down that flag? Is it the Nazi? Is that their way of saying we're Nazis and we just captured you, or we're Nazis, we know you're down there doing something you shouldn't be doing? But I did find kind of an answer to that, because in a cut scene, Sala is looking for things to put together, to tie together to save him, and he finds a Nazi flag. However, before Indiana Jones calls up to Sala, you do see a soldier come over and ask him, like in German, "What are you doing? You know, what are you?" And
You shouldn't be here.
he like, escorts him away and shoves him down. He falls down kind of the little hill. Anyways, that just never made sense to me, because I always pictured that, the Nazis just figured out where he was and they're going to put an exclamation point on there with a Nazi flag, and then nothing ever comes of it. But that doesn't matter, right? I guess that doesn't matter. Then he finds Marion alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Which does, once again, it just builds Indy up, right? He's this kind of, like we talked about, a scoundrel, a drinker, a scholar in his other life, and he finds her and he has the opportunity to save her, yet he chooses the Ark over Marion, right? He'll be discovered. He's not going to be able to find it, but it gives you a good look into who he is, what he's motivated at that time of the movie, because once again, spoiler, you're going to see a whole different message being sent at the end of the movie, where he has the choice of taking the Ark or blowing the Ark up or Marion.
Well, she knew what she was getting into. I mean, she's the one that said, "I'm your gosh dang partner.
I'm coming with
right?
you." Right.
Jeez. I mean, then they want to be saved. I mean, come on. But yeah, he doesn't save her because he doesn't want to alert the Nazis. And but everything works out in the end, of course. Now this is where, of course, we get Arnold Todt arriving, and he's like, "Heil Hitler," and he's got the burned medallion, into his hand,
in his trench coat and three-piece suit.
Did we mention again?
Bolo tie. I mean, he's got 15 layers on throughout the entire desert scene. Whatever 4 or 5 days that this takes place over. The man never takes off his jacket until he walks in at night into the covered tent. How that actor or
Ronald Lacey
does not die of heat exhaustion at that point, I don't know.
Yeah, at that point, I think they were all going batty, because behind the scenes footage will show Spielberg and Lucas, and they're just like, "What are we doing here?"
But it keeps the menacing aspect of a Gestapo agent there, because the Gestapo, the secret police, were some of the worst of the worst.
Absolutely,
he could take it
in Nazi Germany, and so it does. There's something menacing about a black trench coat coming in through the desert. That just kind of
for sure. But if I'm Lacey, I'm out. I'm done. I quit. Call me when we go back to Nepal.
So then we dig into the Well of the Souls. This is, of course, we got to get to the Ark, and this is the, again, I keep saying famous scene. Well, how many famous scenes are there in this movie? There's plenty of them. We finally get into the Well of the Souls. Indy's lured down, and before that, we get the famous exchange of, "Why is the floor moving?" And, of course, snakes.
Of course.
Why does it have to be snakes? Right. Yes.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snake?
7,000 snakes is what they used for that scene.
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
Wow.
They had several thousand. Spielberg just said, "This isn't enough. There's not enough snakes here to make this work." And they had to call some pet shops all over Europe, in London, I should say, England, and get more snakes over there. And half of them weren't even snakes. They were like those legless lizards, I guess. And the only poisonous one they had was the cobra.
I told you it would be all right.
Then we switch to the scene with Marion and Belloc drinking. He comes in and gives her food. He's like, "How do you treat people like this?" And that's where we get the payoff of the drinking game. Right. Which I guess is one of your favorite scenes, because she outdrinks him again.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She challenges him to it. She's got a plan. She has an idea. She's acting the damsel in distress, but she is anything but in that scene. She is in full control, which I think leads us kind of into the 70s a little bit, with the changing of women's roles through the 60s, and, a strong female character that's drinking with men and out drinking men. wouldn't even been put into a movie in the 1950s. In that sense, I think her character is kind of the end, or not the end, but it shows that evolution of women's roles in society. I think you definitely see that within Marion.
And again, that's just the kind of character she is. She's an equal to Indiana Jones as far as how tough she is, I guess you could say. Right. But in that, of course, we get another funny scene where Toad comes in and his goons, and he's got his, you Americans always overdressing for the wrong occasion. And, he pulls out what looks like some kind of nunchucks or something, and he forms it into a hanger, which only, that's just such a great scene too. And he pulls it off so well. He just looks creepy.
Portrays a Nazi very well.
Yeah,
there,
he does.
Right?
Of course, the next morning, through all that, Marion is, Indiana Jones and Sala. Of course, they get the Ark.
Right.
I guess we mentioned that. We forgot to mention that. Very dramatic scene. They get that. They pull it up. But Indiana Jones is the last one down there. And right when he's about to climb up the rope, you find it. The rope, comes down. Sala!
Hello! Hello! Why, Dr. Jones, whatever are you doing in such a nasty place?
Why don't you come on down here? I'll show you.
Thank you, my friend, but I think we're all very comfortable up here. That's right, isn't it? Yes, we are very comfortable up here. So once again, Jones, what was briefly yours is now mine. What a fitting end to your life's pursuits. You're about to become a permanent addition to this archaeological find. Who knows? In 1,000 years, even you may be worth something.
Marion's thrown down, and this kind of builds up to, the last act of the film, where they have got to fight off the snakes. I always felt bad for those snakes too. I mean, they're just living
sprayed.
there.
They're getting sprayed with something. Gasoline, right?
On fire.
Exactly.
Snakes. And then you get you get into the tomb with the skeletons and things like that, and they finally escape through the side wall of the Well of the Souls.
Where are you going?
Through that wall. Just get ready to run, whatever happens to me.
What do you mean by that?
Only to find that the Ark is being loaded onto an airplane.
Which was an exposed wall, by the way. It's like, so that part, nobody decided to get in there. The wall was exposed. It wasn't buried. It's like one of those little things that always bothered me just a little bit. It's like, okay, so it was right there all along. You got this wall, but we're not even going to go into the wall. We're just going to keep excavating other sites. He just pushes on it. There's light shining in,
Yeah. Well, this airplane is known as the Flying Wing, is what they called it.
Right.
And from what I read about the Flying Wing, it's based on a Horton 229. I guess it was a design that Allied troops found after the war, and it almost practically had like stealth capabilities, is what my understanding is.
The shape of the wing definitely is not going to bounce radar back.
Yeah, and so in the film, it's kind of used as a pretty cool looking airplane, but they were saying that perhaps if these went into production while the war was still going on, that would have given Germany a great advantage, but who knows?
It does show Hitler's, intent and the amount of resources that he spent into development of new weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get your first jet fighter from Adolf Hitler and from the Nazis, your rail guns you're going to get. I mean, it's the amount of weapon and weapon technology that came out of World War II was, incredible.
Yeah, there is something to be said for German engineering.
Absolutely.
You have the V-2 rockets in World War II. The first assault rifle was created by the Germans in World War II. So something like this is not far-fetched from what the Nazis and their scientists would have come up with.
And it adds fear, and it adds a little bit of legitimacy to the fear that the Nazis were attempting to develop their own atomic bomb, and obviously forcing our race to go much, much faster, and resources being thrown into the Manhattan Project.
Wait, isn't that why we took them all after the war? Come over here to America, a lot of Nazi scientists.
Most of our Oppenheimer,
of course,
You've got Einstein, to which the Manhattan Project never would have gotten off the ground if it wasn't for that famous letter from Einstein to FDR. So
yeah. Well, the Flying Wing scene is awesome, of course, and very humorous and action-packed. Of course, you've got the big, huge bald mechanic that comes out. By the way, he's one of the only characters other than, of course, Indiana Jones to be in, I believe, 2 or 3 of the films. He was the lead henchman in Temple of Doom also. The tall guy that gets ground up, in that rock grinder that Indiana Jones, it's the same actor. He just,
He's had some bad luck with things that move and spin.
Does he ever wear a shirt?
No, probably not. I mean, well, if you look like that guy.
Big, huge, hairless. Yeah.
And of course they, so, the desert, the flying wing is, of course, destroyed. Now that brings on the desert chase because, well, the plane's destroyed. Now we're going to put it back on the back of a truck. Truck? What truck?
Get back to Cairo. Get us some transport to England. Boat, plane, anything. Meet me at Omar's. Be ready for me. I'm going after that truck. Oh, I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
And that's where we get Indiana Jones on horseback chasing after the truck. Now this is still one of my favorite scenes, action scenes, probably of all time, just because it's real. There's no special effects or I should say like CGI effects in this chase. I love watching this chase over and over again. This was done by second unit director Mickey Moore. And, sometimes how films work like this is that he'll go over storyboards with Spielberg. Spielberg's not even there shooting the scene because these guys are used to doing it, action scenes like this. And this also involves Terry Leonard, who is one of the stuntmen that worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And of course, what he contributes to this scene is the famous Indiana Jones being thrown through the windshield, falls off the front of the truck, hangs on, and then attaches the whip and kind of
drags himself.
He kind of works his way down under the truck. And this is actually something that's been done a couple of times before. What's interesting is Terry Leonard actually did it for The Legend of the Lone Ranger, that horrible film that I saw. Even though the stunts in the film, it didn't go very well for him. He caught his leg underneath some of the horses in Stagecoach and tore some of his muscles, but didn't break anything. He recovered rather quickly. And that is actually a tribute to Yakima Canute. Have you ever heard of Yakima Canute?
No.
He is a famous Old West stuntman, and he was one of the first stunt guys to do that climbing under a stagecoach stunt, and he did it for the movie Stagecoach, in fact. So all of the, like the Legend of the Lone Ranger, and of course this Under the Truck is kind of a tribute to him, but that was just a great stunt. And if you watch it, you can tell kind of what they did. Not that this diminishes how dangerous it is, but they build a trench just enough that his body can kind of fit in, and the truck has to go down this lane without veering off into the trench. You veer off into the trench, you're going to run over the guy.
Right.
But watch it again if you ever get a chance. It's just a great stunt. And
well, another thing on that scene too that we mentioned earlier, creating the American bond. How American is it that he is on horseback?
Oh yeah,
white horse.
I mean, just
riding on his white horse.
The fact that he's on horseback. We have the 50s and the 60s, and there's that whole Western
great
craze
Western,
that America is obsessed
Cowboys.
with. Cowboys, and then you have Indiana Jones chasing down a truck. On horse.
Who can defeat a small unit of Nazi soldiers by himself, through American ingenuity and toughness and not giving up, which once again are themes that we see through the Depression, and you see kind of through, it's kind of in our DNA. That's the belief behind the whole thing.
So we get the Ark. Indy saves the day. I know we're cutting this chase kind of short, but the fact of it is that Indy gets out of these situations, and we get into the next one where it's loaded up on a boat, and a friend of Sala hooks up transportation so they can try to get the Ark back to the United States. And that's, of course, when we see the love scene with Indy and Marion.
It hurts here.
It hurts here.
Wow. Well, God damn it, Indy, where doesn't it hurt?
Here. Here.
And of course, before that, she does the flipping of the mirror. Another big laugh in that film where he catches Indy under the chin. Man, that had to hurt.
Right.
And then we see a little bit of the power of the Ark itself, like Alex was mentioning earlier, the burning of the crate and the rat is kind of twisting. And the next day, of course, the Nazis have caught up with the boat and they board the ship. And the captain of the ship says, I killed, Indiana Jones. He's no use to us, but the girl is. And of course, we know he's still loyal to Indiana Jones and Sala. He's just playing the Nazis. The Nazis leave with the Ark. Jones is not to be found until he appears across the way.
Right. You got to explain
swimming
this to
towards a submarine.
He gets a hold of the submarine. He climbs up to the watchtower.
Waves to him.
They all salute him. They're all excited and cheering.
I got this, guys.
How the hell did the submarine go all the way to the island above water?
So then we switch to a map that shows this red line of the submarine going.
It's a long trip.
So tell me what works better. Switching to the map with the red line just showing us going to the island, or switching back to Indiana Jones holding on to the periscope, literally being dragged through the ocean as he's holding on to the periscope, because that's the scene that they cut from the film.
Oh, wow.
That's ridiculous.
I'm glad they just went with the red line, but I was confused by that because he's very wet when he gets out. And it never shows him getting into the sub, nor where would he go if he did. I was really confused on how he actually got to the island. That makes a lot more sense.
I can buy the red line because I'm already in this movie.
Right.
You sold me on it.
Yep.
But the moment, and I've seen some of this behind the scenes footage, it's just ridiculous. Harrison Ford is literally hanging onto a periscope, and of course it's in shallow water when they were filming it. It just looks ridiculous. That would have really taken. That's almost like jumping the fridge. That's like the fridge from part 4. And we'll talk about that sometime too. I'll actually try to save that one. I've got some things that might actually try to save Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I'd say that'd be a good episode if you can save Crystal.
I doubt anybody will buy into my arguments. But anyways,
knowledge was the treasure.
Yes, knowledge was the treasure.
You can save that and save Rocky 5. You're a magician.
Oh, Rocky 5. We won't even speak about that when we do the Rocky legacy. We get to the island. Indiana Jones, like he's been doing, infiltrates the Nazis. And then as they're taking the Ark through like a cavern, we've got like a bazooka type gun.
Dr. Jones, surely you don't think you can escape from this island?
It depends on how reasonable we're all willing to be. All I want is the girl.
If we refuse?
Then your Fuhrer has no prize.
Of course, Indiana Jones isn't going to blow it up.
Do it.
And they've got to open up the Ark because before they get to Germany and open it up for Hitler, they want to make sure, the Fuhrer, they want to make sure that what's in the Ark is in the Ark. How embarrassing it would be that they did all this work to get the Ark and then have it be nothing more than just dust. Well, they probably could have waited. That would have changed history, of course, if this is a real life movie. Yeah. But they tie up Indiana Jones and Marion, and they're going to have this big ceremony where they open up the Ark, and we all know what happens there.
You get your face melting, and which is it just takes it to a whole new level.
The scene's interesting. It's a little dated nowadays.
Yeah,
special effects. You think they could go in if they're going to do.
But back then, I mean, in the 80s, it held up for a long time.
I like the idea of it's beautiful, and of course the demon or the ghost looks up to the camera and just turns to like a skull. That's a really cool effect. And I guess the idea being the reason why Indy tells Marion to close her eyes is this idea of looking into the Ark would maybe turn you to stone. Not maybe in this film, but I'm just saying through like myths and mythology.
And you see it with what Alex brought up
you weren't allowed to look at it. You weren't.
Right. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't look at it.
You couldn't touch it. You couldn't look at it. And so, it's funny. Earlier in the film, Indiana Jones said, "Didn't you guys ever go to Sunday school?"
Yes.
So Jones had some sort of knowledge behind it, and so he obviously.
Well, and obviously you'll find out in Last Crusade. I mean, his father was a biblical historian and was constantly looking for the chalice.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the argument that was been brought up in like. Some of these shows like How I Met Your Mother, or is it The Big Bang Theory, when one of the girlfriends, our listeners probably know which one it is, but says, when she got done watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones probably didn't have to be involved in that at all for the Nazis just to kill themselves with the Ark. And it really is kind of an interesting...
True. Just let them find it.
Yeah, just let them find it. They're going to open it up anyways. And who knows, maybe they would have taken it to Germany and opened it up in front of Hitler. And the same thing probably would have happened.
Right.
But hey, we've already bought into it. I mean, you got to have Indiana Jones try to stop them, right?
Sure, else you wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, sure.
And he lost. Think about it. He lost. I mean, he wins in the end, of course, because he gets the Ark, but he lost because they got it. They opened it.
Or does he win because he knows?
Yes,
because
I think he knows.
Knowledge was the treasure.
Knowledge was the treasure.
Well, you know, it's funny, as I was, watching this movie not too long ago with my wife, who's a big Indiana Jones fan. She said, "How different is this movie in terms of public perception? If, let's say, this story happened and the movie itself didn't come out in 81, but in 44." Or 45, and the Ark is opened, and it's an American there as the power of God destroys the Nazis.
Oh, wow.
And how different of a film from a propaganda sense is the message that's being sent.
I didn't even think about that.
Right,
that
really
is pretty
good.
interesting. Yeah. Well, that would be an interesting film to see back in 1944. Wow, that's kind of deep. And of course, the last scene, where's the Ark? Someplace safe, right?
Right.
We got
top
men.
The situation is totally unacceptable.
Well, gentlemen, I guess that just about wraps it up.
Where is the Ark?
I thought we'd settled that. The Ark is somewhere very safe.
From whom?
The Ark is a source of unspeakable power, and it has to be researched.
And it will be, I assure you, Dr. Brody, Dr. Jones. We have top men working on it right now.
Who?
Top men.
And nothing is probably, that's one of the best endings of a film, is when you see it being rolled down into a huge factory or a huge warehouse, just being kind of stored away in some kind of aisle and then never seen from again until part 4.
Right.
All right, real quickly, guys, I just wanted to wrap things up by talking a little bit about 1981. That's all. This movie went on to be nominated for 9 Academy Awards. One of them was one of those special achievement awards, but it was up for Best Picture, Best Director. It won 4, mainly for
special
I think it was
effects.
sound, things like that. But, it's always interesting to look back and talk about what was happening in 1981. Some of the things that came to mind was a certain favorite of yours, Alex, became president. Who was that again?
That'd be Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. That was his first term. Obviously elected before, but took office in January of 81. MTV launches that year.
Oh, wow.
August 1981. We got our first MTV. When
Video
it
killed
was
the radio star.
Yeah, when it was MTV.
The Real World, right?
Yeah, no.
Wrong.
Poor
That's
Alex.
your MTV.
Poor Alex doesn't know.
MTV actually showed videos. They're great.
Yeah. Some of the other big films, Superman 2, 9 to 5. Arthur, I love Arthur with Dudley Moore. On Golden Pond, which Henry Fonda got Best Actor for that film. I remember seeing that as well. And Chariots of Fire, which ended up winning Best Film, was released. And one of the classic, The Cannonball Run, came out that year
have to
as
do
well.
one on that one sometime.
Yeah, we may have to do Cannonball Run sometime. It's so good. To wrap things up, any final thoughts on the film, guys?
Oh, it's takes me back to my childhood. It's definitely on my all-time list. It's a fantastic movie. So
It's one of the films that is so rewatchable. It's not one that you watch once and you get tired of. It's something that whenever it's on TV, you can flip it on and be entertained by it multiple times.
Yeah, we talked about we're gonna do this film, and I said, now guys, go and watch it, and everyone's like, really, twist my arm to have to watch this again.
Yeah, that was hard.
Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of History Through Film. If you're interested in following me, Curtis Allen, you can find me on Twitter at History, THRU Film, History Through Film. And you'll be able to catch our podcast there and possibly on Facebook and as well as some other platforms as soon as I get those up and running. By the time you listen to this, they are up and running. So thanks, guys, for joining us. Thanks for you for listening to us, and hopefully you'll catch us on the next one on the History Through Film podcast.